we are live. Infinite Plane Radio, open phones for open minds. 2 days after the apocalypse, the moon hasn't fallen. All I've seen are excuses. Claims that, oh no, they used the eclipse to get everybody out there so they could drop chemtrails on them, which will be activated in 60 days. So they moved the goalpost forward. None of the prophets were vindicated. All of them should be run out of town. But if you look at truthville, it actually caters to that crowd. No standards, no memories, as in they're able to quickly forget how wrong they are every single time with every single prediction. I see a lot of hopium, doom hope. Some are hoping the Pope dies tomorrow because that will somehow vindicate something Q said 15 years ago. The prophecy cult of Q is morphed into something else entirely now, where I realize now it's a form of state-olatry. It's easy to suggest the left worship big government. Easy to say, state-olatry, worship of the state. And the more I'm looking at it, you could look at this as state-olatry as well, where they're worshiping presidents. It's not just JFK, it's not just Trump. These guys worship Abraham Lincoln, and by worship, they believe that these are divine beings sent down to save us. It's fascinating as it is disturbing. We're joined by Angst G, Diana South, Peace Circle 360, Adaptivia, Michelle Kastner, Ted Striker 2112 says, proudly showing off my IPS reflective sticker on my truck. Oh yeah, the Infinite Plane Radio sticker designed by X322. Excellent piece. I have one here. I haven't sold it yet. Ted Striker says, did JL have anything to say about the eclipse? I have not listened to him in a while. Well, I haven't listened to him either, but I'm pretty sure he would have remarked on the 4.8 mag earthquake with the ground zero at Trump's golf course 2 days before 4.8. And on 4.8, Trump releases this, or he shares this video of an eclipse where his head eclipses the sun. And when you look at that, dates 4884, honestly, JL's on track to be maybe the first internet prophet here to actually call it outright. And it may well be that a lot of these bots are disinformation to drown out what he has been pointing to. And I'm not suggesting something's going to happen. I'm pointing out that they're going to fake something, and we're calling out the fakery in advance. And it seems like they want to flood the zone so nobody arrives at the correct interpretation. But one thing, JL26, whatever, well, it's probably JL50 by now. How many channels have they banned? One thing is he's got June 11th as one of his primary prophecy dates, and what would follow that would be 8/4. And another point here, the movie Leave the World Behind, the Obama's production from Higher Ground Productions, was released on 11/22, zip code 11963, which is a JFK reference, headshot reference, 11/22/1963. And in the movie, it features prominently this map of America with an X through it. So you have this X, this 4/8 eclipse tie-in to the movie with a reference to the whole JFK thing. And it gets more interesting. You look at the other, it has two release dates, the Netflix and the theaters. The theatrical release, 12/8, or Netflix, 12/8. One of them was 12/8, December the 8th. The whole movie was kind of against the backdrop of the death of Matthew Perry on 10/28 during an eclipse. His character's birth date, Chandler Bing, is 4/8. But 10/28, then 1/28, and this all tied into that bridge, which was hit at 1/28. And then I remember thinking about this number before, because 10/28 is the date of, well, Bill Gates' birthday, the date of the first Q drop. But that's also the number that the environmentalists put on their shirts when they shut down the tennis game. We have 10/28 days left until the world ends, which I believe is in March of 2025. But that number has consistently been attached to this same theme. 10/28, 1/28, what does it mean? I don't know. Challenger exploded on January 28th. So we're looking, what is the meaning of this? And you can't say it doesn't mean anything. Everything in that movie was selectively chosen for its intrinsic meaning, and specifically its political meaning. The movie was propaganda through and through. 1619, White Lion, it couldn't be any clearer. Yeah, this the 4.8 on the Richter scale. 4.8 magnitude. On Drudge, they put 4.8 mag, which made me think MAGA. Dewis Impera says, what's the next world ending date to be afraid of? If you're the Pope, you should be afraid of tomorrow. But 6/11, if you're in Seattle, that's the date that we have on our calendars here that it's going to get the fake nuke. And then Trump gets his Antichrist crowning head wound thing on 8/4. If, I mean, it's a big if they're right. Now, I've been very critical of these attempts to predict dates for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is the longer you try to build the case, the stronger your case gets, even though it's no more accurate. And it has to do with cognitive bias and a certain fallacious way of gathering data, and then drawing attention to your hits and ignoring the misses, which is a huge part of what we're looking at here when it comes to internet profits. Not just internet profits, the profits at your local strip mall church where every few months they announce the end of the world. We had one of those. We used to laugh at them. When I was, we'd drive by it and I'd be like, okay, the world was supposed to have ended. And when you look at the psychology behind it, they double down. People double down on false prophecies. They pull the lever another time. They deal out another hand because there's this bias that there's going to be some kind of a balance. It's going to add up. Things are finally going to do it at some point. This is what keeps the QAnons stuck on this story because they've invested so much. It's like a sunken cost uh, kind of a feeling gets into this thing. I've invested so much, I'm going to get it back. But also they think, I've been wrong so many times, I have to be right eventually. You flip a coin heads, heads, heads. Eventually, it's going to be tails. And the fallacious reasoning is in thinking that you can predict the next one. Just because it's been a string of tails doesn't mean it's any more likely to be heads. However, with regard to this prophecy about Donald Trump, it would only and can only make sense this year. This is the last year when it could possibly make sense. So this is it. Jay Digg says the first season of Fallout came out an hour ago on Amazon. Yeah, I didn't realize that was Jonathan Nolan, the brother of Christopher Nolan. So you got Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer, Nuke, his brother, Fallout, which follows the nuke. Kind of interesting. They got, you know, uh, predictive programming in the family business. Copaesthetic says, do we have contact information in case they nuke his channel, JL26? I don't know if he makes himself available, but I'd like to actually have a conversation with him again. We've talked to him a few times. Penguin Doctor says, hey guys, just got back from the all-you-can-eat nothing burger joint. I'm stuffed. Oh yeah, it was free triple nothing burgers for everybody on Eclipse Day. But I'm going to check out Fallout here in a minute. It takes place in Vault 33. Joined by Lean Dion. Let's Go says, good evening, Raft. G33 says, University of Wisconsin shooting in the past hour got scanner alerts. Well, if there's only a couple of shootings, I mean, a couple of deaths or injuries, if we don't know, and they don't give us any kind of uh, like high body count or crisis actors, it's probably real. I generally say it's fake until proven real, but they can meet that burden of proof. And ironically, it's when they don't tell you as much. When they're telling you a bunch of stuff, that's when their story falls apart. But in reality, on an ongoing murder investigation, a shooting investigation, you might not get the whole cast of characters and the whole story in one succinct episode. So the less they tell you about it, the less they report on it, the more likely it's real. You'll never hear about the real shootings. You'll hear about politically expedient ones, possibly, but generally, they want to control all of their reportage. It is that fake. G33 says, like I said, the eclipse is a doorway opportunity to start something. Well, I don't accept that. I mean, what I mean is, I don't accept that anybody saying the world's going to end on 4/8/2024. I don't think they get a second chance. They can't say, no, this is the beginning of the end. I'm sorry. The beginning of the end was back in 2017 when this whole thing started. They said there's going to be an X across America and that's it. Well, we had it. But what can we extrapolate from this? Not quite sure. I mean, it could easily be some kind of a marker. We have another movie coming out as well, Civil War. And by the way, the consistent symbolism, numerology, it does convey a message. And one of the consistent messages has to do with the number 611. And specifically, as it relates to the nuke situation, 611 and 11.6. Even Oppenheimer's badge was K6, like 116, and that number has been consistently attached to the domestic violent extremist threat. So 9/11 external threat, 6/11 internal. And when they pull off this fake nuke, and this is all consistent with Leave the World Behind, it will be blamed on white nationalists, likely financed and supported and supplied by Russia. No, what I mean about the eclipse is, yeah, sure, you can use that as a starting point like New Year's, but what I'm saying is that the eclipse date is not the beginning of the end. It was meant to be the end date. Everybody got it wrong. Nobody got it right when they predicted the world would end, and now a lot of them are saying, "Oh, this is just the beginning of the end." And I'm sorry, but we've had enough. The Super Bowl didn't get nuked. Taylor Swift is still out there, and now this. Like, it's just so much. I can only handle so many nothing burgers. I'm not a breatharian. I need some substance here. Okay, let's move on here. Philly mass shooting, gunfire erupts at a Ramadan event. Multiple people shot, conditions unknown. 4 in custody, 4 guns recovered. Motive and circumstances unknown. This was hours ago. Not quite sure. I haven't really followed up on it, but there have been warnings that events would be targeted, and this is reported on Fox. So there's a strong likelihood that this is fake, but we'll follow on this later as we get more information. I got a comment from Middleman AD who said, when they fake an event nowadays, they get a lot of B-roll so they can put out a Netflix documentary later, i.e., Making a Murder or Tiger King. They probably do this so they can hit you with the programming and trauma twice. First on the news, then on Netflix. Yes, and additionally, they use the fictional version to really implant in your mind the totality of the story. You absorb it this way, and it actually affects your recollection. It's called retroactive interference. You're made into a false eyewitness. Your testimony is bolstered by more BS that makes it seem realer. So it's all by design. They make us all liars. The world stage makes liars out of everyone. So in addition to nothing burgers and goalposts moving, I did see this other trend where a lot of the big truther channels out there, the ones with millions of subs, are all saying, yeah, the whole thing was for chemtrails and Mandela effects. They turned on CERN, so expect more Mandela effects. So Jacob is Ear071 said, post all your new Mandela effects here. My hope is that life gets more interesting from this point on. This is a test. Now, he's asking people to post Mandela effects that have happened as a result of CERN turning on during the epoch eclipse. So let's see here. I responded. Mila Kunis had braces in Jupiter rising, which nobody remembers that for some reason. And it's also mostly remembered as Jupiter ascending. Moving on. Yeah, G33, I'm just talking about internet profits. I'm not talking about in the abstract sense. They literally said on 4/8/2024 the world would end. It didn't. And I don't believe that you can say that this is the end date, and when the date comes, that you can then pivot and say, well, no, it's the beginning of the end. Like, no, that's not valid. That's your prophet needs to have his head. I mean, he needs to be fired. Is what I'm saying. You can't have a prophet like that consistently wrong. Even a broken clock is occasionally right. These prophets, they're not only always wrong, but they never correct themselves. They never adjust their trajectory. They never adjust their aim. They don't reassess the facts. They just plod on forward. All right, moving on. This was something posted by Synchro Morpheus, kind of a fascinating concept called nominative determinism. And this conversation had to do with, we were talking about subliminals in advertising and how it's used in predictive programming. He says, we know they use subliminals in advertising, so it makes sense that the PSYOP programming would be full of them as well. I know I've noticed plenty of examples of this. How many did I not notice? A lot of their tricks work like the literary techniques to pull the reader further into the story. And he brings up a term called aptronym. referring to people's names that correspond with key elements of their characters. And we often talk about these characters whose names, like, um, what was the one who was the health minister? Her name was something Block. And if you looked at her, you're like, okay, there's a reason why she's named Block. It seemed like it was some kind of a costume of some kind. But where Derek Chauvin is another one that we often, talk about how his name Derek implies a hangman. It's tied to a hangman who hanged 3,000 people, whose name is actually now now part of a pulley system for cranes. And of course, Chauvin, which would tie into Derek Western chauvinism. Yeah, Maggie the Block. I mean, it's like a wrestler's name, right? Like Maggie the Block. But like this is the health minister, and we just thought it was strange because the all these individuals there who are concerned so much about their health are just models of unhealth. So here's a health minister, and it had to be a joke. Maggie the Block. I mean, come on. But anyway, what he's suggesting here is interesting. There's something actually called nominative determinism, which he suggests here that maybe Derek Chauvin was destined by his name to oppress minorities and choke them to death, and he could use this as a legal defense. And it's kind of interesting to think about self-fulfilling prophecies, etc. But I think this is definitely an aspect. I mean, we've actually honed in on this, and oftentimes, in fact, our last server, which was deleted because of some federal informant Nazi, had an entire section on world stage names, and we had compiled dozens of names where their name specifically had some sort of significance to what they were in the news for. For example, there was an individual at a Chick-fil-A, and this was obviously a staged story if you ask me, where a man was stopping a carjacking while he was in line. The Lord's Chicken is what I heard it called today. Trump was there, and like, yeah, this is the Lord's Chicken. So at Chick-fil-A, employee prays for saving a woman and a baby from a carjacking. Now his name is Branch, and anyone care to guess what Mr. Branch used to swat away the carjacker? Anyone? Let's see. The woman told deputies she was getting in her car and put her nephew in the car seat, and the suspect was William Branch approached her, and so then he was carrying a branch. So William Branch carrying a branch, wielding it in a way that she believed would be a weapon. He lunged for her, and then this employee came out and stopped him. So yeah, Mr. Branch with the branch attacking some lady gets chased away. No evidence, just a story. Yeah, you got it. But we have many examples. In fact, we should just do a whole compilation. But Derek Chauvin is definitely one of them. Let's move on to next topic: trains, planes, bridges, and cranes. Last year it was trains. Then, ever since the Obama movie, it was planes. Because, as Mike Rothschild assumes, we literally believe that the Obamas are going around rigging planes to make them fall. Like, this has nothing to do with the Obamas. They just got in on the PSYOP entertainment complex. It's good business. It's the new Hollywood. But anyway, I'm looking at this. Like, so it went from train derailments to planes falling apart, which is an ongoing thing. Then bridges being threatened by cargo ships whose power goes off. This has happened more than once. I have another incident just a couple hours ago in Beijing. And then, oh no, Beijing was a crane falling. So here we go, crane falling. Now, the cranes have some possible significance to the story. They're very important in symbolism in China. They're second to the phoenix. Driver jumps out seconds before his van was crushed by a falling crane. Another falling crane crushes a vehicle. Another child narrowly escapes. That's another thing too. Both of these events, these recent ones, there's a lot of repetition here. It's like the same script is going along. Yeah, just adapt this for your locale. One person was taken to a hospital. Another arrested after a crane fell and crushed a van. This is in Singapore. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Just want to kind of show you some footage here.
I heard a huge bang, like something exploded. Then when I look over the window, a crane just actually folded into the car. I didn't even see the driver, whether he's well or did he manage to get out. I just immediately called the police and, to get someone to be there.
He says, just like that Obama movie. No, he didn't say that, but may as well.
我跑下去，
I never seen someone so happy to see a big crane fall and almost kill somebody. It's almost like he might have received a paycheck. But this is a story that we've heard a couple of times already, and it's just being retold again and again. And with the planes, same thing. With the trains, same thing. With the bridges, same thing. So I'm thinking at some meeting at the capstone level of the Lie World Order Media Mind Control Center of Operations, they're like, okay, for the next few months, got to hype on bridges being hit by cargo ships and falling cranes. Work with what you have. And then all the different regions set up their psyops. That's what it looks like to me. Okay, so much more interesting stuff to get into. Just a quick overview of my notes here. Nominative determinism, falling cranes. Oh, Jim Caviezel being struck by lightning. I don't know if any of you heard about this. Jim Caviezel, who was 33 when he was chosen to play Jesus by Mel Gibson, was struck by lightning on set and died and came back to life. We'll talk about that, and obviously it's true because no way a guy who plays Jesus, no way a guy who's part of Q trying to save children would lie. So we also have another thing. I was watching Leave the World Behind, and I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but when it ends, it focuses on the scene of these cicadas swarming. And it just so happens to be that this year there's going to be a swarm of two combined broods, a swarm the likes of which we haven't seen in 200 years. And I believe the ground zero for that is going to be in Illinois. But I thought that was kind of interesting because you have the movie series, or the Netflix series there, Three Body Problem, and it definitely ends with cicadas and the timing of it. This is what I'd call concurrent programming. Not a coincidence. AI didn't do it. No supernatural entity did it. No supercomputer did it. Everything on Netflix is coordinated with news events, media events. And it may be a natural event, but they're certainly contextualizing it in a certain way. Okay, let's get into this Jim Caviezel story really quick here. Yeah, Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning on the last shot of the movie. The cast and crew were filming the Sermon on the Mount scene, and on the fifth take, Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning. This required 2 heart surgeries. He actually died. Jim Caviezel, JC, 33, died after being struck by lightning while filming Passion of the Christ. And this is typical of the type of psyops that I think used to kind of go unchecked because there wasn't really a mechanism like there is now. Like here we are, real time, calling BS as it's served to us, day after day after day. But at the time that this movie came out, which would have been a few years ago, there wasn't this network of world stage media critics ready to call stuff out. And so this just ends up being a highly successful PR stunt.
Got me out of my body. I saw the back side, not here. And I remember looking at him, and all of a sudden I saw his hand blow up. And he also says, I didn't come to bring peace into this world. I came like a sword to divide. Fifth take, it was bizarre. The wind was blowing hard, and the clouds were, it felt like I could jump up and touch them. And that was very mystical, what was happening in the ground. You could feel something in the ground.
So he's playing Jesus on the set, God comes down on a cloud, and boom.
It was probably more like 3 seconds. It felt like 5, but it was probably less than that. And then boom, I shot me out of my body. I saw the back side, not here.
He stepped out of his body. He saw himself on the cross. I mean, whatever. This is all just myth making. Jim reveals, and this was just last year, Never heard before. Like, so he could have just made this up. Never before heard details. Passion of the Christ. From a chilling encounter with a lightning strike while he's on the cross, causing him to have a profound out of body experience. So he actually had an out of body experience in this as well.
And then I was back. Then Jan Michelini runs over, and I remember looking at him, and all of a sudden I saw his hand blow up. Sparks came out. There was another shot that came down.
Now, this is during a shot. Like, if this was actually filmed, fifth take, we're filming him, he gets struck by lightning, we have an out of body experience on camera, they would have released it. This would have been released. Okay, there's another movie coming out very soon. It should be interesting. It's called Fly Me to the Moon. It stars Scarlett Johansson, who's some kind of marketing expert sent in to save NASA because they can't figure out how to get to the moon. But to trick the Russians, they're going to have to figure out how to fake it. And this movie is called Fly Me to the Moon. Looks really good. A couple of things about it strike me as specifically interesting. We'll play part of the preview first.
Hey, Joe. Evening, Cole. And you are the very best.
Excuse me? What are you doing here?
I tracked you down because I felt we had a connection.
What?
I'm joking. I work here now to sell the moon.
Okay, this is, again, Scarlett Johansson is this marketing executive sent in to sell the moon landing. Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum stars a 1960s ad shark and by the book launch director on a mission set against high stakes against the backdrop of the historic moon landing this July. There's a line in there where she says, I think we should have gotten Kubrick. Let me see if I can find it. That alone might be worth watching the movie, as corny as that is.
My Armstrong is a whiny little witch. We have to recast.
But this is really going into the whole idea of NASA faking the moon. This is some dangerous territory.
I think we should have gotten Kubrick.
Should have gotten Kubrick. They're going dangerously close to auto-hoaxing, but this is where you have the guardrail. What is the guardrail? Yeah, the moon landing was faked, but we faked it because we had to trick the Russians because space is actually real, and moon landings are real. We just can't do it yet. So they don't debunk moon landings categorically when they say the moon landing was faked. And you'll find that none of the experts do this either. None of the expert moon landing debunkers, like Jim Fetzer, for example. And I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. Really good book. He debunks the Apollo 11, but he doesn't consider moon landings debunked. It's absurd. It's a guardrail. It's a guardrail to say, yeah, you go this far, you can see this is fake, but there's a secret space program and Q is real, so don't get off the misinformation superhighway. Stay with us. That's why I use the term guardrail, because they're moving you somewhere. You're on a trajectory. And Dewis and Paris says they're sanitizing the Kubrick theory. Yeah, they are. They're opening the door up here to where if you're smart enough to see through the moon landing, you can actually look at it as a propaganda victory. Nothing to mock, especially since they accomplished it later anyway. Which is, again, redonkulous. It's a house of cards. You can't build on fake with real. Like next year they come up with super realistic graphics and we're just going to like forget 50 years of obvious fakery. The fact that their graphics get better over time reveals quite a lot more about this whole thing. That it's a movie. It's a movie. It's a reality TV show like the news. And also, this misses the point about Kubrick. There's a documentary called Room 237, which I consider to be guardrailed, in the sense that it'll convince you that Kubrick knew something about the moon landing, and he wanted to let us know because he's a secret truther and he felt bad or something. Now, that's a very selective interpretation of the subtext and symbolism of The Shining. Because if you look at The Shining objectively from start to finish, you see that not only are there references to Apollo 11, but there are references to JFK, and there are references to 9/11, which hadn't happened yet. So it contains predictive programming, allusions to the moon landing being faked. And the 9/11 predictive programming in The Shining is reiterated in the sequel, Doctor Sleep, which has a child who psychically predicts 9/11. So I guess my point here is that the Kubrick explanation that he faked the moon landing is incomplete. It doesn't recognize that NASA is not just there to fake space. They're faking everything. That this is the mind control. Outer space is just it's a metaphor. It's a way of describing our inner space, which they're populating, controlling. They're defining our worldview, controlling your mind. And that's the PSYOP entertainment complex. God Was Bored says, Fly Me to the Moon is a song written in 1954. The first recording was made by Cale Ballard. Frank Sinatra's 64 version was closely associated with the Apollo missions. Now, Scarlett Johansson was in the movie Asteroid City, and that has a very strong subtextual link with her and Marjorie Cameron. The movie Asteroid City, she sees a UFO, and the first UFO sightings, first contact. Marjorie Cameron from the Babylon Working, who was called the Scarlet Woman, a connection here with Scarlett Johansson, was the first to report seeing a UFO, slightly after their little magical occult ceremony to summon the Antichrist or something. She reported seeing a light from the sky, and this was a year before Roswell. This was 1946, the same year as the nuke. Nicholas Pitt said, I was not able to finish Asteroid City. I was bored out of my mind. I was there with a notebook taking notes. I remember detailing how they had a song where they're Dear Lord, no, Dear Alien Who Art in Heaven, where they do the Black Mass reversal of the Lord's Prayer, but instead of Satan, they supply aliens. And it makes perfect sense. And the left worships aliens, which is a scientific version of angels. And this movie's really all about that. And one of the fascinating points in there is when the alien descends in its hexagonal craft, all of the witnesses are wearing boxes on their heads. The significance there is the box is the cube, and the cube relates to the six-pointed star and the connection with the divine, the light coming down from above. It's all very occult. There's a lot of subtext in that movie. But as far as you couldn't finish it because you were bored out of your mind, yeah, I wanted to finish it. I tried, but I was with some friends who were there to be entertained. I was there to take notes, and nobody wanted to stay. I was the ride, so we had to leave. So I didn't actually see the end of it. At the very beginning, though, it opens with a scene where you see a fake nuke in the background. And one important point about Asteroid City, the protagonist is based on Stanley Kubrick. You know, the guy with the camera around his neck? Very fascinating connection there as well. When you get into the symbol of the cube, Stanley Kubrick, and the monolith, which is the most important symbol here among the body of symbols and ideas that he has introduced. The merging with the monolith, 2001 Space Odyssey, and as this relates to 9/11. Let me get into this really quick, because I think there's an effort here, rather there's a tendency to mystify the various seeming coincidences that we see around these events, that this has got to be something more than just chance, and this can't possibly be scripted because it's just too incredible to believe. And I'm absolutely disputing that whole theory. I think the more likely explanation here when it comes to predictive programming is that this is how they pre-sell you on the news. It's advertising, it's repetition and propaganda, and it also gives a little hint as to just how scripted things are. And it shouldn't be a stretch to accept this. They can script fake shootings. They can script any kind of psychological operation. What is a drill but a scripted operation? What is a simulated news event? Well, it's a drill presented as news, but these things are written in advance. They are pre-scripted. So it shouldn't be a stretch to posit here that we're looking at long-term planning. But this is an article by chartword.com, Stanley Kubrick's Faked Death and the 9/11 Hoax. It's incredible. And it goes far beyond the whole thing about room 237. But what I want to point out here there are some obvious things I could get into. For example, and we're looking past the Apollo 11 stuff. He's speeding towards the Grady twins, little Danny on his tricycle, and they represent the Twin Towers. Next scene, and this kid's psychic, of course, so he's psychically seeing 9/11, you could say. He drives past the girls, they're chopped up on the ground, there's an upside down chair, there's a fireman's axe, and it looks strangely reminiscent of Ground Zero. This is followed by a scene where Danny's throwing darts, which suggests projectiles, in a room where the twins are standing next to a Bell telephone tower. Well, the twin towers are adjacent to the Bell telephone tower. So you have this reiteration of this theme. And then it gets into the monolith and the symbolism of the monolith, and it just so happens to be the case that at the 9/11 Ground Zero site, you have a hotel designed to resemble the 2001 monolith. It's called the Millennium Hilton. A couple of things about this, like Millennium Falcon, these are all codes, I think, for the new age. But one thing about the Hilton, which is interesting, is if you look at the logo, and you can't unsee it, look at the Hilton logo. It is obviously a plane flying into the Twin Towers. Long-term planning, predictive programming, subliminals. This is highly advanced mind control. I mean, this is the most sophisticated mind control system ever. This is the one world order religion, and they tap into our subconscious and they plant seeds all the time. But the significance here has to do with, of course, Kubrick's connection with 9/11, with the entire PSYOP entertainment complex. And there's a few other scenes in here. It goes back even to, interestingly enough, everyone should know here that 9/11, 1941, the Pentagon's construction began. 60 years to the day. In Doctor Strangelove, there's a scene that revolves around, this whole movie revolves around a jet airplane on a rogue, low-level attack mission. So General Buck, Flight 77, treetop height. So there's some foreshadowing there and more. I don't want to go through this entire article, but the space plane arriving at the station does look very, very conspicuously similar to 175 hitting the South Tower. Very close. My contention here is that our news is certainly written long in advance, and that the entertainment media bolsters the news. It sets our expectations, plants seeds, narrative threads are woven long in advance, and when it happens, it's not outside the realm of possibility. It doesn't set off red flags as being fake or unbelievable because you've already been drilled for it. You've rehearsed it. It's implanted in your mind. That's how advertising works. So I look at propaganda, advertising as just two parts of how they present to us our worldview, and they execute it on the world stage in the likeness of a reality TV show which looks convincingly like news media there to inform you. But no, really their whole purpose is to conform you. Lean Dion says the phone number on the Millennium Hilton is the date of the original WTC bombing, also with the number 2001 at the end. Maybe we should make a reservation. Okay, Ground Zero, Millennium Hilton. Fascinating. Now there's something else about the monolith as well. The monolith represents the movie screen, and the movie has this character, David Bowman, merging with the monolith. What does this mean? I believe that 2001 and the connection between 2001 Space Odyssey and 9/11 2001 are pretty clear. It has to do with the two becoming one. The two being the sun and the moon, the zeros, 2001. One is the sun, one is the moon. It represents the conscious and the subconscious, the alchemical merging of the two. But I think in this context, more specifically, it's the movie world, the dream world, merging with the real world. And they control the dream world. Now let's see here. We're talking about Fly Me to the Moon. It'll be out very soon. Another important movie to watch is going to be Fallout, specifically because it will be following Oppenheimer. Here's another story I mentioned. Huge shipping container loses all power near New York City Bridge not long after the Baltimore Key Bridge collapse. New York tugboat captain reported a container ship lost power while transiting New York harbor. They had 3 escort tugs, but 3 more were needed to bring her under control. Little 3-3 there. Disaster averted. Now, with the Baltimore Bridge, I would contend that it was rigged to collapse. I don't buy the premise that you could knock it down so easily. I just think that was 100% staged, planned, and there every indication that that is the case. Michelle Kastner says Scarlett is a twin. Interesting tidbit there. And when you look at these actors and actresses, it's important to look at their entire catalog of work and what archetypes they have consistently portrayed. And Scarlet is a very key word. Like the movie Barbie, we talked about the symbolism of the Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, in the New Age context. And Scarlet is certainly part of her role here. It's encoded into the name, sure, but it's another way of referencing it. Israel's 6-month assault on Gaza kills over 33,000 Palestinians. Believe it if you want. We already talked about the eclipse. Crow 777 claimed, he says, quote, I boiled 2 gallons of vinegar to be able to see. Eclipse is over, the sky is blue. I have footage that I will edit and post on my site away from the censorship and control. In other words, you can watch me boiling vinegar to clear the skies, but you got to pay me. We have to pay. It's a paywall. I wanted to see the vinegar boil. What do they call that? And do they cook anything? Do they attach it to like a barbecue or some kind of event? Trillions of cicadas to swarm the U.S. First double brood emergence in 200 years. Brood 13 and brood 19. Last time this happened, Thomas Jefferson was president. Now, I believe I read somewhere that ground zero is going to be Illinois. We'll see. They're not going to overlap to any significant extent. One professor in Ohio created an app called Cicada Safari to track where they're going with the highest density. I earmarked that article simply because the end of 3-body problem made a point to focus on cicadas. And there may be some deeper symbolism there. Selena says, 2 Becoming One was a song by British band the Spice Girls, and the video opens up with a shot of the Twin Towers. I remember looking at that. You know, we could do a compilation of all the 9/11 predictive programming, and it'd be a 3-hour, it'd be long, it'd be multiple, it'd be like a trilogy, like Lord of the Rings. And it's all by design, of course. They saturate your subconscious. They paint the picture on the zeitgeist. They project it onto the collective psyche. And the 2 into 1. 2 towers, now it's 1 tower. And the 1 tower is 1776 feet high. Okay, let's move on here. Should I find that predictive programming, Spice Girls? 9/11, 2 into 1. Do they pull the video after? That's usually one of the things they do. Okay, I found it. I don't want to play it, but I'm looking at the thumbnail, and yeah, it's pretty obvious that it's there, prominent in the background. A lot of album covers, one of the first things I noticed. But I also want to mention here that 9/11 is not a big deal compared. What I mean is that it's something they give a lot of attention to, sort of like certain shootings, certain events. But the PSYOP entertainment complex is always running a psychological operation. It's built on psyops that have become real through hyperstition, fake events that are believed into existence, reinforced by the government, reinforced by law, reinforced in every such way that they become real. They fake it into existence. Like crisis actors. This is kind of ironic, but you can look at any one of these actors who emerge on the world stage after a fake event, and they will exist in the textbooks. They are real, and we won't exist. That's kind of how this thing works. Let's continue. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here. Someone asked me a question. What about JLB stating it's not scripted? Well, this is one of the things that is worth discussing and debating because there are two schools of thought here. One of them is that everything is real as reported with some bias, and any patterns are the result of apophenia, cognitive bias, and just conspiracy conjecture. It's just coincidences. That's like the main school of thought. But the other one is that these coincidences are too eerie. And I remember discussing this after 9/11. Everyone would just say, "Oh, artists just somehow psychically pick up on things. Artists are in touch." And it made sense, sort of, like they're reading the zeitgeist, they're more sensitive. Like, it's just in a vague way, I guess it makes sense, but no, that doesn't quite cut it. And the other explanation, therefore, is that there must be some other element. There must be something, whether it's supernatural or highly advanced computing, AI, synchronicity, collective manifestation, because we're all paying attention to the news and these events are drawing in some kind of energy. So you start throwing around words like energy, higher power, supercomputers to explain all these coincidences. And that's not an explanation, it's a mystification, it's an obfuscation. In fact, if anything, it's concealing the perps, the programmers. We're trying to figure out who are the programmers, and the trend, the tradition, the habit has just been to say the programmers are in some way above man, like they're not reachable. This is something beyond man. It's like what I said before. If we believe that computer hacking was too complicated for man and therefore could only be accomplished by gremlins, we would never catch hackers. And what they're basically saying is that predictive programming is being done by gremlins. And I reject that premise. Arthur C. Clarke's law, the one about any sufficiently developed technology will be indistinguishable from magic. Sure. Doesn't mean it is magic. We go to a magic show. You don't know how half of those tricks are done. Do you, by default, say, well, I couldn't explain that one, so it was magic. But that one was an optical illusion. But that one was magic for sure. No, you don't. So when you're looking at the black box, you're looking at the monolith, and you see something you can't explain. Your default explanation should not be magic. It should be, I don't know. But my point here is that you're not going to get the information you need if you're sitting in the seat watching the magic show. You need additional perspectives. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. And what I wanted, because a couple of things. There's this tendency, for sure, to mystify things instead of getting down to the facts of the matter. And what we have found, the deeper and deeper we have investigated into this, is that predictive programming is actually very easy to explain. And it's not just a few things here and there, it's a lot of things. If it was just a few things, I would say coincidence. The fact that it's a lot of things means it's standardized. Interestingly, the other side of the conversation will say, if it was just a few things, I would say it was scripted, but it's so much, it's got to be a higher power. No, they have it backward. And I can make the case in a number of ways by referring to concurrent programming, and Leave the World Behind has really been a gift to explain how mundane this thing really is. Dewis Impera says, maybe there's an underlying AI-generated metascript that resets every 2,160 years for each age. Predictive programming could be man's way of paying homage to the AI god's metascript. Now, I would say this. There is a script that is a central template to this, but it's the astro-theological script. It's in the stars. But for me to accept the premise of an AI, I would need to know, well, where was this computer? Where is it physically located? If there's a supercomputer, where is it? And then the other argument is basically, there's no way man could do this. There's no way, man. Okay, well, that's not an argument. That's the argument from incredulity, personal incredulity, or the divine fallacy. It asserts that a proposition must be false because it contradicts one's own expectations or beliefs, or it's difficult to imagine. So sure, it's difficult to imagine that they're writing our news 30 years in advance, in broad strokes. More detail as they get closer, but it's difficult to imagine, or is it? I mean, can we not point at singular events? For example, we'll just say the bridge thing. Or no, let's go with something that's more definitively and obviously scripted and fake. We'll go with the Boston bombing, for example. And the ones that have media tie-ins, predictive programming, whatever it is. When you're looking at these things, if you can grasp that it's a drill presented as real, and they had actors there, then you can already accept the premise of pre-written, prefabricated news. Like we've already accepted the premise. They fake the news. They do fake or simulated events and they present it as real. So they fake the news all the time. So my point here is that why would we look at predictive programming as separate from the fake news? It's what leads up to it. You can look at the psychological operations, the big flashy spectacular events as crescendos, like in a story, like in a novel, like when the story reaches its resolution. But everything that leads up to it is predictive. It's programming you. It's preparing you for what's to come. Like this is the script. And what we're examining with so-called predictive programming is just scripting. The script as it's being relayed over time. Look at the space program. You think that they're guessing, like presuming that they're faking it. They know they're not going to go anywhere. They're not launching the next rocket and then writing the story. They already have a story. The story is moon landing in 69, go into low Earth orbit in the 90s and stay there at the space station. And then about 20 more years later, we're going to go land on the moon with a crew that's going to build a base. And then 20 years later, Mars. You can look at climate change. Like, oh, world's going to end in 2030 unless this happens, and the temperatures will be here. So they can plot things out in advance. That's what I mean by scripting. And once you have the script, that, oh, this is the story we agree upon. The story is climate change gets this bad by 2030. Work your way back and build up to it. And now every single Netflix show, every single movie production actually feeds into that larger story. Going through your comments here. Mango Penguin says, we've come to eliminate hate from feeble minds. They just need calm, loving understanding. Dewis and Paris says AI is a placeholder for the creator, if that's a thing. Yeah, that it is. And the same people who won't say God will say AI. And one of the arguments I made here is, or the questions I raise, is the news media divinely inspired? Like, if you're going to suggest that what we're getting in the news is divinely inspired, that some of these writers, some of these directors, some of these actors are just tapping into something. Okay, well, call it AI or call it God. Now, if you're going to make the case that media is divinely inspired, are you going to accept the same premise with the Bible? Are holy books divinely inspired? Did Aleister Crowley actually channel a book from some Egyptian god while he was high on cocaine in the desert? Selena says, is Seattle predictive programming still going on? Lost track. You know, it could be the case that all the Seattle predictive programming was for ground zero 3/11/2020. There's no reason to think that they're going to be hit again necessarily. I think that prophecy has been fulfilled. Although there still is quite a buildup for some kind of nuke up there. So I'm still looking at 6/11. Tominoid says, isn't AI controlling the news benders? Yes. Yes. But look, again, people say AI like it exists, like it's an authority we can refer to, or that we can even posit its existence. And I'm just asking, like, where? If we're at the point where we've arrived at the end of what we can possibly discern, we figured it all out, and now there's just this, what we can't explain. It's the God of the gaps. It must be God. It must be divine. And it's fine to make that argument. But if you're going to, and you're going to stand by it and not lose a debate, you have to provide God or invite the AI into the room. Otherwise, Occam's razor, man. Man programs man? Or is God doing predictive programming for the fake news? Like, let's just pretend. No, let's just assert that predictive programming is all being done by God and AI and demiurges. So there's ghosts and gremlins doing that stuff. They're not doing the actual psychological operations. They're not doing the fake terror attacks with the terrible actors. So if man is doing the psyops, are they outsourcing the predictive programming that prepare people to accept the psyops as real? Are they outsourcing that to a higher power and to God? Or are they seeing the predictive programming that God put there and they're fulfilling it with fake news? You see, it's very paradoxical, incoherent. You can't insert that with it making sense. And I would also argue that the argument from incredulity is lazy. It's a lazy explanation that doesn't provide any more information. It's a non-explanation. It's a pay no attention to the man behind the curtains. Okay, next, let's talk about this. Anti-anti, a skeptical perspective on trutherism. And as far as debating it, is it even debatable? Like for example, if you're an atheist, can you debate a believer? No, you can't. We can provide our best cases for each, though. Like for example, if you're a believer, you're not going to change. You're not going to become a knower. Believers will reject facts that contradict their beliefs. Is there a term for it? Believerism, the tendency to issue facts in favor of consensus agreement. That's where we're at. We're in a world of believers. Tominoid 3 says, just because you have a believable explanation doesn't make it any more correct. Well, it's not believable, it's logical, and it's factual, and I can demonstrate it to be true. I can point to very specific examples. For example, Netflix, American Apocalypse, comes out the night before Trump kicks off his campaign in Waco. Waco, American Apocalypse. Trump kicks off in Waco, calls it the final battle. Game of Thrones comes out with something where the queen dies in childbirth, just as the Roe v. Wade leak is prompting protests and marches. We have too many examples, like the flood the polls midterms 2022, the GOP slogan, flood the polls, flood the polls. And then you have the QAnon-like character, the Riddler, sending his extremists to bomb the dam and flood the polls in the Batman movie. We have so many examples that you couldn't say that this is random or God. You would have to say that this is scriptwriters who are intimately connected to the political agendas that they're encoding into their movies. It's just strange that you would look at propaganda and then say God did it. It's not a there's not a cohesive argument there. And what's more, it's almost like it's wishful thinking, perhaps. Maybe that's what it is. But what's more, it's this. It's like, let's just say that gremlins do all the computer hacking and let's stop going after hackers because we can't understand how they do it, but it's because it's beyond man's capacity. Like, again, you are exonerating the perpetrators. So if you want to believe in magic and demiurges writing the news and you want to be mystified, go for it. But you're moving away from knowledge and you're moving into the realm of belief. And that's fine. And that's why I wrote Anti-Anti, a skeptical perspective on trutherism. And I don't want to read the whole thing here. I sent it out, but I want to go over a couple of the basic concepts. Welcome to Truthville. First of all, I'm describing the world stage, the internalized concept of the world that the consensus accepts as a true facsimile of the real thing. So it's our mental construct of the world, our worldview. It's our physical world combined with our understanding of it, informed by our senses, personal experiences, societal norms, education, ideology, religious convictions, and mass media. In other words, the world stage mental construct is our subjective view of the world, but as filtered by our presuppositions. And the primary filter, the primary one that we all share, is mass media. And within mass media, the normieville perspective is the one that is the least contested. It's the one most people fit into. Most people are comfortably numb here. It's the collective comfort zone. And the trouble with normieville is that it's held together by the strength of government lies and psychological influence operations. And the propaganda doesn't always stick. So you have a group of people, a large group of people, a large set of the population, who aren't satisfied with the regular run-of-the-mill explanations. And they are the ones who are, of course, going to be attracted to Trutherville. And from Trutherville, Normieville looks like the Matrix, full of dreamers. And this is where it gets to be tricky because they move into this new paradigm where they're awake and the others are asleep. But the problem is their position is not awake. In fact, they might be agitated, they might be engaged. They can't be described as sleeping necessarily because they're too restless. But the fact of it is they've entered into a deeper level of engagement with the mind war. So if anything, their dream became a nightmare. The truther worldview is populated by doom, gloom, and hyperstitions. Hyperstitions are things that don't exist. Goblins, for example, or gremlins. Well, these things don't exist. Bowl cut shooters. But if everybody agrees they exist, if everybody pretends like they exist and acts like they exist, you could say, well, this superstition has been given more of a reality. It's a hyperstition. But I am suggesting here that the general truther point of view is nightmarish and superstitious, as opposed to a blissful dream. Now they take, truthers that is, truthers take the anti-position on all issues. They're the antis. And we hear the phrase controlled opposition quite often. And what does that really mean? It means that the opposition to the mainstream is ultimately controlled by the same interests. So you have people who naturally feel like something's wrong with the world and they want to pay more attention. And depending on where they lean politically, they will go into Trutherville or Woketown. A Woketown is built on outrage against the status quo in Normieville. But the difference is Woketown is pro-media and pro-government, whereas Trutherville is anti-media, anti-government. Wokers take the pro position on issues opposed by truthers, and they're firmly on the left. All of the political footballs and culture war talking points deepen this divide. But the issue here is, or the similarity here is that both the truthers and the wokers have the same goal, waking up Normieville. So you have both sides at their extremes of the political horseshoe competing to wake up the people in the middle. Now, outside of Normieville and Trutherville and Woketown, there is nothing. It's a closed system. There is no establishment-approved opt-out from their reality anchor. So whether one chooses to remain in Normieville or if one opts for further engagement, they're still within a subset of the mainstream. The alternative currents, both right and left, are smaller than the mainstream and they stem from it. So you could be a truther, you can be woke, but your worldview is built upon every premise established by the mainstream. Now, aside from the masses in these boxes, and it's a tight, closed system, there are no alternatives. Like you are normie, you are programmed until you deprogram. There are no unprogrammed. You have to deprogram or you're programmed. That's it. You're born into this. But the perpetrators would be considered slightly outside of it. The scripters, the low-level crisis actors, there's a whole slew of individuals who, in positions of some kind of knowledge about how this works. However, it's so compartmentalized by necessity, there's no reason to think that somebody involved in a psychological operation would be apprised of the big picture. They're going to know what's in their segment. They'd likely stay in Normieville. They would recognize that the fringes are being hit hard with psychological operations, but they wouldn't step out of the box. You wouldn't have that perspective. I would maybe astronauts at that level would have some clue as to how fake it all is. They would have an overview. But the entire thing is so compartmentalized. The box, though, I mentioned the monolith. The box that the minds are in, the Normieville, Trutherville, and Woketown, that is the monolith. That is the universal filter. And it creates this agreed upon mass delusion that has merged our real world experiences with the mass media illusion. Here's a quote from Gene Kranz, director of Apollo 11. The simulations were so real that no controller could discern the difference between the training and the real mission. So back in the 60s, the simulations were so good that it would be foolproof, that the people in the command center wouldn't know that they weren't in space, that they were talking to people who were faking it. So that tells you something about compartmentalization. You think all those people cheering in the control room in Houston when a rocket goes up, you think they all know it's fake? No, they wouldn't be able to react like that. If they knew it was fake, they would be slumped over on their desks, bored out of their minds. But no, they're clapping their hands and jumping because they think it's real. They're true believers. A foundation of fakery. Predictive programming and fake news are part of the same metascript, which merges fake and real with the entertainment media as programmer for the news program. Truthville, and this is a sad point, they're stuck on this, because this is, what I'm doing here is I'm pointing out facts, uncomfortable, inconvenient facts that do describe a demographic. Like you can say, and you don't have to point to the one exception, it doesn't contradict the major trend, and there are very few exceptions. This system is so airtight. But you look at a leftist. Leftists believe in climate change. They have every reason to. And they have every reason to scapegoat the right. Like there's a certain logic to every single position. And therefore, leftists aren't going to believe in chemtrail theory because they're on the other side of the. These are ideological political positions. These aren't scientifically founded concepts like chemtrails. There's no science there. It's a paranoid delusion that's agreed upon in Trutherville. But in Trutherville, you're not going to find anybody believing in climate change caused by fossil fuels. They'll believe in geoengineering caused by government secret projects. See, it's perfectly compartmentalized. Now, in Trutherville, one of the consensus beliefs is that nukes are real. Every other InfoWars episode, they're going to nuke us, World War III. All the main influencers in Trutherville adhere to this particular big lie. And therefore, their entire worldview is skewed. I'm not going to follow someone who panics over fake nukes every day, especially if they assume they have the intellectual high ground. Like, how dare you not believe in nukes? I still get people, how dare you not believe in chemtrails? I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to follow somebody screaming at the sky about climate change or geoengineering death. It's all programmed fear. You can keep your fears. You know, it's a funny thing. Truthers collect fears in a certain way. It's like, and these fear propaganda mules, they'll say to me, oh, you're not scared? You're not worried? What if it was you getting shot? What if it was you falling off the bridge? What if you were the 9/11 jumper? They're always throwing, like, you should be afraid. How dare you not be afraid? And it's like truthers are collecting fears, fear pills. The way the Mendoozled collect Mandela effects. They got a pocket full of these things. Oh, you're not afraid of this? Fear this. Oh, 5G? What about this? What about this? It's like, okay, look, I I'm pretty certain here that the main weapon of the power elite is literally fear. I referred to rule number 9, Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. The threat of the thing is more terrifying than the thing. It's one of their Machiavellian MOs. The emerging parallel media, and we are the core of this. We are ground zero for this. This raft is this. This is a platform for the deprogrammed. Fear is for sheeple. The elite use fear to corral them. In the recent Netflix release Three Body Problem, there's a quote, "A lack of fear leads to extinction. Humans must learn to fear again." And this got me thinking that what they really mean, because the aliens are the elite in this movie. I think it's all just metaphor. And what I think they mean here is that man must be dumbed down, propagandized, and stuffed with superstitious dread. And you could say they've already accomplished this. If you are a true believer in the news media and the science and you're really paying attention, you would literally believe this is the end times. We are in the end times. Not because God, because Gaia. Oh no, it's ridiculous to think God's going to pull the plug on this thing, but it's science to say Gaia is going to do it. And if you don't believe Gaia is going to do it, you're bad, because you're going to bring about the end sooner. And which I'm fine with, by the way. I'm a climate change accelerationist. consume all you can, burn all you can, just go through all the raw material. This world is ours to use. It's a realm, it's probably infinite. The scarcity is a big lie. And they just want to constrain you at every level. So, the worst case, you accelerate climate change, we accelerate the adoption of solutions that actually work. Because nobody's going to go with any of these solutions until we see there's an actual problem. And I don't see there is a problem. So let's just, you know, put your foot down on the gas and let's make it a problem if it's even possible to make it so. And I don't think it is. I think we could push this thing as far as we want, drill and all that stuff, and nothing's going to happen. I don't believe in geoengineering, climate change. I don't believe I don't believe in anthropogenic climate change. Geoengineering, as described by the conspiracy theorists, is fake. Secret project to alter the weather. No, it's not secret. Geoengineering is what the leftists call their climate change mitigation. So if you believe in that, you have to accept the premise of anthropogenic climate change, which I don't. Dewis and Paris says the irony is they use the sheep to corral the rest of us. Yeah, exactly. You can rise above the fear, you can be smarter than it, but if you're surrounded by people that aren't, good luck. I was surrounded by people who were slathering their groceries in hand sanitizer. Look, I didn't have fear or doubt for 1 second in 2020. I was not panicked even in the slightest. Yet I was surrounded by people that were, and they used the power of fashion, not to mention shame, and they imposed this new thing on us. But yeah, the sheeple are the elite. The elite are few, the sheeple are many. The sheeple are extensions of them, and it's how they exert their power. Okay, moving on. Now, one of the points here, like I'm not scared because I'm deprogrammed, but I want to make a point here about religion and the power of propaganda. And mainstream media is the world's biggest religion. It's the de facto world state church. And I think we can agree on this. Christ didn't literally have to die and come back from the dead, nor does he literally have to exist for there to be Christians. Maybe Muhammad never got married to a 6-year-old. It doesn't make a difference. Fakery rules the masses, and they're foolish believers, and they fall for all sorts of provocations. So the intrinsic reality of these various myths doesn't matter. I know more about the fake news they believe than the believers believe. The believers actually know. So let's say we're talking about the latest spate of mass shootings. Nobody who believes the stuff actually does any digging. They turn their heads. It's bad news. They don't want to know. They just accept it like osmosis. So it's kind of ironic that those who don't believe it are the ones who've actually looked. I've made this point before. There's a study that said 8% of the population don't believe in the moon landing. And what's the difference between that 8% and the 92%? The 92% never looked. And if they did look, they would be among the 8%. Okay, moving on. I guess the point is this. I want to emphasize that the mental and emotional nature of the world stage construct needs to be focused on. Not the fear that something bad's going to happen, the sky's going to fall, they dumped chemtrails on you, that there's military age men moving in from other countries. They have all these things that you're supposed to fear. And again, the fear promulgators are to be avoided, to be shunned. It's like a plague. It's like leper, like whatever they're spreading. These things are, in a sense, these are the munitions in the mind war. Like, who are the terrorists? It's the carriers of the fear who get you to be afraid, to keep you in a protective posture. You used to have a normal life and you loved going outside for walks, but now you're agoraphobic because of chemtrails. Now you have a bug out bag and a bunker, and you're saving up all of your ammunition, and you're segregating from liberal friends who are going to be siding with the New World Order, etc. Like, they have this whole system designed to move you into a nightmare scenario. And fake rules the day. Fake always has. And it's similar to religions in the sense that if you ask somebody for evidence of the religious claims that they've accepted, there isn't any, and they don't care. They don't care about the debunking. Well, how similar is that to talking to somebody who believes the news? Like, oh, here's evidence it's fake. They don't care. They believed it. The off-world stage quarantine. So this is the next stage. We have to break away from this plague. That's ultimately what it is. You don't beat the Psy War, where they control the field, with obvious tactics like protesting, for example. Uh, the movie War Games has this tagline, strange game, the only winning move is not to play. My intention is to quarantine deprogrammed minds. Everyone enters the Psy War unaware. And every indication is that humanity is programmed into the frame of reference defined by a monolithic media religion. These things are all merged. Government, media, religion, what's the difference? There's only one government. There's only one space station, and it's international. I mean, there's a couple now, but what I'm saying is there's a common agreement on what's above. They all agree to fake us out. We look at like inflatable tanks, inflatable rocket launchers, and dummy tanks, all kinds of decoy operations at work. And you're supposed to believe, oh yeah, we were tricking the Nazis with inflatable tanks. No, that's not what they were doing. They were tricking the cameras to trick the people into thinking that this whole thing wasn't just a major decoy operation. Now, the information we're discussing here, I would consider this to be privileged. I think the masses were not intended. We're part of the masses who are targeted by this. We're not intended to be able to see through this stuff. The example I posted here is the masses were not intended to read the Bible. That was for the educated elite. Similarly, mass media has converted the masses into believers, as they lack a specific understanding to know what it is that they are seeing and believing. Richard Nixon said the Americans won't believe anything till they've seen it on TV. Absolutely true. And they are trained to accept the screen as a window to the world. And they're discouraged from seeing it as a filter, which is what it actually is. The process of quarantining is very straightforward. We amass a parallel media composed of non-believers with media skepticism as a foundational tenet. We separate from the phony alternative media by refuting each controlled opposition talking point, each truth or orthodoxy, until we arrive at a common understanding of where we exist relative to the world stage construct. I have another part to this I have to bring up. I'll have to go to my emails because I made it free for members. So if you're in Patreon, you will have free access to this document, and if you're in the main site, I also sent a link. But let me bring this last part up here. The part about anti-anti. And what it is that we're actually doing here. Like, what do I mean by anti-anti? Who are we against, or what are we opposing? And this is really the crux of it. We says Tricky was right. Yeah, he was right, and he may not even know the full extent to how much he was right. He might have just been, maybe he was being a little cynical, but it's absolutely true. Okay, so the anti-anti. We'll start with the digital hoodwink. First of all, this. The Matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. That's an allusion to the hoodwink. And the hoodwink is the sack they put over your head when you're brought into one of these initiatory cults. And they remove the sack and you're shown the light. Candles on the altar, whatever it is. But the wool over the eyes symbolizes the darkness of the people outside the temple. So in other words, outside the temple, you have the profane who have not seen the light. They're purposefully kept in ignorance and darkness. And what is that ignorance and darkness? It's a reference to what they don't know. And what they don't know, of course, is protected by blood oaths, by these secret society networks, like security clearances. Very few people are aware of how fake this stuff is, how fake news media actually works, or how the media works. Because this is privileged information. We're not supposed to know this. But the Matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. The hoodwink over your eyes is the screen, quite literally. And that was said by Morpheus, named for the god of dreams, to Neo, who was living in a dream world until he was extracted from the Matrix pod. The Matrix pod is a great analogy for the mass media propaganda box and the immersive illusion it creates. It posits a worldview that many mistake for the real thing. This internal simulation is built to serve the interests of the controllers. Whoever controls the media controls the mind. Jim Morrison. The psyops serve to program us by inserting fake events into our timeline, which become historical events. Who controls the past controls the future. George Orwell. History is just a record of agreed upon fake news. It becomes real to those inside the closed system of ideas because of the feedback loop, which affirms its existence as the world stage construct makes room for new conditions, new people, new events. So, for example, I don't exist to the world stage with the claims that I've made, but there are various people we could point to. David Hogg, for example, doesn't exist. I mean, he exists, he breathes, he eats, he's a physical organism, but the persona who's been introduced to the world stage is a construct built on lies. But then, because he's one of these characters in the script, his existence is pretty much secure. He will be in the future history books as some reformer who fought against guns and saved lives. Meanwhile, those of us who know the truth about these operations will not exist. We won't be carved into stone. The closed system of the world stage makes fake real. Those who insert the fakery are the programmers. I like to allude to the movies like Hunger Games or, I guess, Westworld, where you have the elite represented as these individuals around a table which has a scale model of the world. And the people inside Westworld, or the prisoners or the contestants in Hunger Games, they exist within that. And the ones who are overlooking it can insert new conditions, like here, throw some fire here, make it rain here. And what they're doing, though, is they're showing how the elite are able to insert into our worldview through our internal concept, hyperstitions. Again, similar to superstitions, but these become real because of the feedback loop. So they insert fakery, and these are the programmers. And predictive programming inserts hypotheticals into the world stage. Now, while the world stage is merely a construct in our minds, to the programmers it represents the realm of possibility. Anything they can fake on the world stage through TV and media, if it becomes accepted as true, it becomes real in a hyperstitious way. So in order to make the realm of possibility include what they're going to fake, they just have to plant a lot of seeds. The anti-anti. This is where we get down to the main point of this ebook. All claims are not equal or deserving of equal investment in time and energy. We're not going to get any further if we're going to now abandon the idea that there are scripts being employed here, and if we start looking for supercomputer AI demiurges and higher powers. Like, we hit a dead end with that. Now, I support people who advocate for issues they believe in, and I support people speaking out against things they're opposed to. I'm open-minded, and I believe in free speech. And I think it's important to point that out because we aren't trying to censor or anything, but we're trying to arrive at the best answers. So, for example, during the scamdemic, I platformed anti-vaxxers to the detriment of this channel many times because we were studying the process of censorship in an ongoing information war. And we didn't have any callers that were pro-vax. But that's okay because the mainstream position supports that. The mainstream is pro, so they don't need any more advocacy. But at the time, I thought, I better platform the antis. Let's have the balanced perspective in all this, thinking that there was some intrinsic value. But here's where I was wrong. Because looking back, I can see now, pro and anti are both world stage positions. These are positions that only make sense if you accept the mainstream frame of reference and the premises they establish. The anti-position is a thoughtless and reflexive knee-jerk position. Anti-mainstream is not the same thing as honest or true. The skeptical position is to suspend judgment before taking a side. To automatically assume the anti-position is not a skeptical move, and you couldn't be fully informed. To just jump on the anti, jump on whatever the mainstream's not saying, is not an informed position. And the influencers that adopt that position are fully integrated into the mainstream views. So any big channel that is representing the opposite of the mainstream, they believe in moon landings and fake nukes and everything else. So my point of it is, it doesn't make any sense to march lockstep behind agents or dupes. So from here on out, the auto-hoaxer position on any current issue needs to be anti-anti, as well as anti-pro. I used to say I'm pro-pro, pro-anti. No, these positions are not equal. They're both fundamentally flawed, but I want to make it clear the anti-position is just as flawed as the pro-position. If you're taking the anti on any bifurcated psychological operation or schismatic political football, you're actually taking part in the info war. Those of us who are looking at it as such, as conscientious objectors, aren't participants, so we don't need to side with the antis out of any kind of obligation or principle. True skeptics must be as skeptical of the alternative as we are the mainstream. If anything, again, we have to be as anti the antis as we are anti the pros. This is something that look, maybe some won't want to hear this, but if you're promoting the anti-vax agenda, you're on Team Fauci. You're part of what keeps that machine going. And you're promoting an info war based on a prop and a scenario. Meanwhile, the prop had an entirely different purpose, which I've discussed at length, but my point of it is, of course, both sides are on the wrong side of the screen. The auto-hoaxer position is on the outside of the controlled dialectics, outside of their alternate reality games. So I'm not going to reflexively join the anti-position to the current thing of the day. Key point here, this is axiomatic, automatically believing the counter-narrative while rejecting the mainstream is not auto-hoaxing. In fact, this is how the controlled opposition, truthville, was actually populated. It was populated by gathering all the dissidents and baiting them with loaded questions. What are they spraying? Or half-truths like, the media's lying. But they don't mention that alt media builds on those lies and is part of the same structure. Dreaming minds. I think the primary issue here is that the government lies all the time without words via simulating and televising events. So the tell lie vision gives them carte blanche over our minds. And the truthers are focused on issues and current things, seeking to reveal the conspiracies, lowercase c, without ever seeing the conspiracy, capital C. The big picture. We exist in their dream world because it's not recognized as such. And you can't even recognize it as such as long as you're in it. The simulated news events are just scenes on the world stage movie that are used to maintain our common anchor point. Nobody dies because these are theatrical productions. Nobody will ever take the guns because they already took our minds. No mass depopulation is necessary. The masses pose no threat to the elite. The world stage is an idealized version and a horrifying vision composed of dreams and nightmares, hopes and fears. The monolith will tell lies that its viewers want to believe, and it will pander to their sense of certainty. And it will feed their cognitive biases with endless confirmation in the form of beliefs. Resistance is compliance. Now here's where we get into the part where people get mad because we're not taking action, or I'm advocating take no action. Ditch the paranoia. Relax if you want. I mean, you don't have to, but I'm saying nothing's going to happen. Nothing real anyway. It's just info war, mind war. The same things have been recycled, and those of us paying attention to cycles aren't falling for it again. I heard all the rumors about military-age men and terrorists coming across the border too many times to take it seriously anymore. But resistance is compliance. This is the next chapter. You can't build a mob of angry people about fake shootings because truthers think these shootings are real with false narratives attached, but they still think these things are real. The level of fakery and its implications are outside of the media literacy level of the mainstream and conspiracist minds. The only ones who truly get this are media skeptics and auto hoaxers. You would not get anywhere just opening up a big tent to a bunch of brainwashees. Those who have a full grasp of how 9/11 was special effects, how school shootings are drills presented as real, were far outnumbered by truthers. And truthers aren't skeptics since they go along with establishment approved counter narratives. They're just as programmed. Knowing this, we're not going to have a voice. Skeptics aren't going to have a voice in Trutherville. We never will. If you were a truther and you ran over to Woketown, you're not going to be heard. You go to Normieville, they're going to laugh at you, call you a tinfoil hatter. You see, you're going to lose. It's a numbers game. And so instead of losing and being drowned out by a bunch of brainwashees, agents, and dupes, I was like, let's just break away and do our own thing. Which is exactly what we're doing. So the afterword here, rise of the controlled opposition. The bottom line, truth or fear is not justified. The elite have Trutherville cowered in superstitious dread. To take the anti-position is to comply with the mind war's terms. This is a false resistance, tantamount to full compliance. The only solution is skeptics need to make a clean break from the propaganda box. The parallel media could be considered a quarantine to break away from the box of approved conspiracy theories, and we build a presence, foment a culture of disbelief outside of their construct. And it's only from outside that it can be effectively challenged or even changed. Any other effort will only sustain its existence. If you don't believe the lies, then you should cease supporting those that do. The most reasonable option is to exit the false awakening, the nightmare of alt media, and enter into the parallel media. What I have here on the screen is a graphic I made this morning that I think sums it up. At the very top you have the all-seeing eye, the programmers. Below it, the programmed, and it has a box. The box says the world stage closed system. The big blue box is Normieville. Within Normieville, you have two smaller boxes, Woketown and Trutherville, but they all exist in the closed system that I call world stage. Outside of the box, you have the deprogrammed. These would be the auto hoaxers, the media skeptics, and the non-believers. Now, if you are adhering to any belief, whether it be chemtrails or an anti-position, because chemtrail is an anti-position. It's like climate change. If you believe in climate change, you're in the box. If you believe in the alt climate change, you're in the box. It's just a question of which one. And these are just facts, because these are not things you can make knowledge claims about. And we are breaking away from believers and aggregating knowers. So it's fine if you want to stay in the box. We're not trying to rescue people. We're just pointing out which side of the screen we are on from this position. And it's up to anybody to decide whether they want to exit the world stage or to remain on it. So anyway, that was the ebook I released today. I skipped over some large parts of it, but it's going to eventually see print. It's called, and this will probably be in the Insider, Anti-Anti, a Skeptical Perspective on Trutherism, and the cover has some cyborg penguins on a tank burning down Trutherville, and they're being chased out by a group of people in tinfoil hats. Elephant Tusk says, Tim, I have a question for you. You have claimed these immigrants pose zero danger. What do you feel their true purpose is, or do you believe the whole thing is made up? Yeah, it's a nothing burger. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying to say immigrants are dangerous is just xenophobia. I mean, I don't know where to go with that, other than you bought into a partisan line here. It's a bifurcated psyop. So you believe because Alex Jones told you, or someone told you. Fear military-age men. Yet, if you were a lib, if you're on the left, you would say, oh, we have working-age men coming. So are they working age or military age? And I'm not afraid of immigrants. I'm not afraid of aliens from some other planet. I'm not afraid of the pretty much fill in the blank. And if you are, you've been programmed. Like if you literally think that your life is threatened by immigrants, then you have been programmed. And the people who buy all this stuff will say that I'm working for the other side and I'm trying to open the borders to get everybody killed by the bad guys. I heard one recently, they said, the Air Force is going to draft in all the retirees to leave us unprotected for when the immigrants kill us. Like, this is xenophobia. And I recognize it very clearly as a part of this structure where the right wing is closed, the left is open on every single issue. Porous, sealed. For example, aliens from far away. The left wants them to come down here. They probably want to breed with them and get their technology. The left loves aliens. We believe, we want to believe. And the right has been told by Tucker Carlson and many others that aliens are dark and scary, demonic. Dark, scary, demonic aliens. And the left is like, we love aliens, join us. Now let's bring it down to earth. The left loves illegal aliens. Come into our homes, cross our border. The right is scared of illegal aliens or immigrants in general because they are from far away. And I hear Tucker Carlson, he's like, you got to be scared of these military age men from other countries like Africa. You got to be afraid of these aliens. They're dark and they're evil. You see a pattern? And it has to do with borders. Again, left is open borders, open skin. They're all for the vax. They're all for open borders, and they don't believe in the Second Amendment because they want to open their doors to the immigrants. Whereas the right wing is close our national borders, strong Second Amendment because we want to protect our home borders, and of course our skin. The right believes that their skin must be sealed against any kind of invaders, injectable invaders. And the left is like, booster me up. So open and closed. But it's all the way down. And I believe this is how they get you at a deep level to feel insecure. So if you feel afraid of this threat of immigrants, it's because they made you feel insecure. And it's not a coincidence, I'm saying, that every anti-vaxxer is anti-immigrant and probably scared of aliens. Like, find me an exception. You won't. Going through your comments. Oh, now one more point. What happens when all the aliens show up? In every single movie, every bit of predictive programming, what happens when all the aliens show up? Humanity unites. We get rid of borders. One world. That whole thing of they come down here to stop World War III. It always leads to one worldism. Well, how are aliens described? The grays. Black and white. Gray. Hegelian dialectics. Accomplished. The antithesis, the thesis, the synthesis. So the alien grays represent the one world system where there are no borders. It represents the total alien invasion, not space aliens, but the dissolution of borders and national distinctions. So the alien invasion is now ubiquitous. There is no one nation. That's what it's ultimately about. I think the alien invasion is to condition us to embrace the alien, whatever that may mean. And it has to do with loss of national identity and the dissolution of everything into one world. And I think America is the phoenix that has to burn for this to happen. America is the bad example. This is why we can't have nationalism. This is why we can't have these societies that are built around consumers feeding their own egos at the expense of Gaia. Like, I think America might be a bad example that this is Babylon that has to fall. But again, just pointing out that if you're afraid of anything and it's a partisan fear, it's fake. Just a heads up. Okay, moving on. Again, anti-anti, you can get that on or in your newsletter. And I'm just putting it out there that I'm no longer in support of the anti position because the default position of the quote truther is to be an anti. And it brings them no closer to the truth. Never has. Okay, back to my minds.com/infinite plane society. We're talking about falling cranes, falling boats, Jim Caviezel lying about getting struck by lightning, John Levon on X, the big question of the moment, how are these coincidences happening? Are a bunch of clever humans doing this, or is there another explanation? If you haven't followed this thread or watched this video, I'll put a link in the chat. This is a fascinating conversation. It's just started. Scripting versus sync. What is predictive programming? How do films, TV shows, music, and other popular creative outlets seem to, quote, predict major events? Well, I want to point out the major events they predict are fake, are they not? This is why I think there's a hole in the logic here. If every event that predictive programming foreshadows is fake, then I think it's safe to say it's the same script writers. Now, if predictive programming was showing up to reflect things that were out of the blue, that were unexpected, completely random, I would say, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. That bridge got hit, or this thing happened, and this pandemic happened, and these movies all foreshadowed it. That's eerie. That's crazy. I guess they have to tell us. The bad guys have to tell us before they do it. That's the usual explanation. It's like, how do you explain that? Well, that derailment, a train derailment happened just like the movie White Noise. Well, that's a weird coincidence. That's eerie. No, the whole thing's scripted. So in other words, if the news events are fake and the predictive programming leads to it, it's coming from the same source. But I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have, and we're going to get closer to the truth as time moves on. And what comes out of this eventually, I think, is that people have to just recognize their own position honestly. My position on this issue is I'm a believer, not a knower. I'd like to believe it's true that airplanes are dumping poison on me, but I can't prove it. So we can agree to disagree if you want, but my take on that thing is no, we can't. No, we can't. Well, we can disagree. No, we can agree that you're wrong, is what I'm saying. Because facts are facts. Opinions, anybody can make their own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Although my comment, and this is what started this conversation, is getting a lot of traction on X. And what I said is this: the predictive programming is predictable. We know what movies will contain it just by seeing who directed it or by looking at the trailers. And it connects to political agendas 100% of the time. The theory that predictive programming is magic, occult, or supercomputers is some type of outmoded truth or orthodoxy. So, for example, there's going to be a movie coming out in a few days called Civil War. I'm telling you right now, Civil War is going to have predictive and concurrent programming. Now, if it's all random, I wouldn't be able to make that prediction with certainty. But I know it's not random. I know that there's a contiguous relationship between narratives in the entertainment that merge with the news and then go back into the entertainment as they merge the two back and forth. They weave between real and fake, real and fake. And they do this on purpose because they want our internal concept of the world to dominate the real thing. You know, like the metaverse needs to be your focus, not the meatverse. They want your internal concept of the world to be your dominant frame of reference over your physical experience of it. And the internal concept includes all the propaganda. So instead of seeing peaceful, quiet towns, empty hospitals, everybody staying home, you believe the hospitals are centers of activity like beehives, and bodies are falling out the windows, they're dying so fast, the tents outside are full. Pure chaos outside. No, it's all quiet. The chaos is in your mind. All right, let me run through my Twitter feed. I'm on X. You can find IPS Live on X at the account called IPS Think Tank. We have 35 listening there. We have a handful over at DLive. 68 people listening on the main YouTube channel. We have a few joining us from Facebook, Twitch, Odyssey, and a slew of audio platforms like Paranormal Radio, Radio King, Radio.net, TuneIn. Diana South says, I agree, Tim. Both these sides get funneled into the same mindset that leads to the same meat grinder. Yeah, and I describe them. I describe the controlled opposition talking points as guardrails because if you can imagine, you have sheeple being rushed down the misinformation superhighway. Some of them say, "Hey, this is pretty bad. It's wrong. Something's not right here. So they try to drift off and figure out what's going on. And as soon as they do, they're told, oh, you're right. You're so perceptive. You're awake, not like these sheep. You're awake because you know this is fake, and here's the truth. It is what they said. People did die, but it was done by MK Ultra SSRI enhanced MK Ultra wind-up toy shooters, assassins sent by the deep state. So they give you a deep story about the satanic ritual murder that took place. Like that's the truth, not the mundane school shooting caused by gun culture. So now you're still on the misinformation superhighway. Your story is a little more colorful, a little more interesting, a little more violent and scary, but you're still going in that same direction. You didn't reject the premise established by the screen. And everyone's running through this screen, through this filter, just going down this superhighway. And anytime they drift, they get bumped back on. So I look at these explanations like, oh, it's a false flag. That's why it looks fake. That's the guardrail that needs to be destroyed. False flag theory is a fallacy. It doesn't account for the role of media itself in the production of these events. It also assumes them to be real, assumes these are war crimes being committed, not propaganda films. A lot of assumptions are built into the false flag hypothesis. None of these events have ever been proven to be false flag. In fact, it's categorically something I think that's been debunked. There haven't been any false flags when we look at these events in the news. These are simulated news events. But they want you to believe false flag theory because you still think people died. That's why Alex Jones and others are not allowed to say nobody died. Okay, let's see here. Tomanoid3 says, Eyes Wide Shut, AI, Minority Report, Mission Impossible 2, Vanilla Sky, Kubrick, Spielberg Cruise, 2001. A lot of I's, flus, and 33s. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the key point here is that if we're going to rule in the divine or AI or any of this stuff, then let's do it. Let's go through the various examples we can find of predictive programming. The best examples, just find all the examples you can, and then put a check mark next to the ones that could not have been done intentionally. Which ones were there intentionally, which ones were random and therefore must have been a higher power. And then we can debate those ones individually. And I think once we get into the specifics of it, I think we can see the architecture of what we're really looking at. Hidden persuaders, subliminal advertising, advertising fake future events through repetition in the entertainment which is integrated with the news. The fact that they bend our news, that is, they write it in advance and implement it, that's how they write history. That's how they flawlessly direct history. They're not directing random events. They're scripting it entirely and ignoring the random. I mean, what we're looking at is reality filtration. Reality is happening, but the perspective that goes down in history is highly selective. I'll have to watch AI again since that was a Kubrick project. But the point of the anti-anti position is so we can separate from the knee-jerk reflexive response to everything, which invariably ends up being some kind of establishment approved version. It doesn't challenge the status quo. Then of course we had this other conversation about, is media divinely inspired? So this conversation is going to continue, and again, there's all the time in the world to do this. We're not in a rush, but what I want to make very clear here is that we shouldn't fall into the trap of assuming that because we don't have an explanation, we have to default to magic. You can be agnostic. Like, I don't know what the world is. I don't believe NASA stuff. Do I therefore have to believe, since I can't provide an alternative model to explain it, do I have to believe theirs? No. You can be model-less. You can be a non-believer. Lean Dion said, Westworld 3 had 2020 riots and a fake revolution. Yeah, and if you look at the cover of Westworld 3, all the promotional materials, again, these are intentionally planted things. This is how deep the scripting goes. I'll pull this one up first, because this has got several clues in it. First clue, free will is not free. So this individual, this is a android who's doubled over. Looks like he's impaled on the building in the back, which I contend represents the One World Trade Tower, which looks like a big syringe. And by the way, the word syringe comes from the word syrinx, Pan's flute. Pan, god of panic. And we've got uh, the syrinx, syringe, pandemic, panic. It's all very well integrated when you look into the symbolism in the words and the meaning of the monuments, such as this one. But now it looks like this person's impaled. Free will is not free. Oh, you can't leave your house unless you get the pokey, unless you get the impalement. You can kind of see the subtext here. But then you have other elements to it as well. For example, we're looking at some of the West World posters. One of them had a release date. Let's see if I can pull it up here, where it shows a 311 just kind of surreptitiously inserted into the thing. And sometimes you have to turn these things sideways. Like Aleister Crowley said, you got to learn how to look at things back and forth, upside down, etc. But Westworld is replete with predictive programming. We've analyzed this ad nauseum. The season 3 in particular had plenty of references to what was going to go on. So you wouldn't even call that predictive. You would call that concurrent. And it gets super deep. I mean, this is fascinating. Rachel Wood, who plays Dorothy, very, very fascinating character. So Dorothy is a sim who is realizing that every day is starting all over again and it ends in a very bad way. But the reason she doesn't know this is that the Sims don't have any continuity day to day. Every day starts over again, like amnesia. But until you can break the cycle, until you can see it's a cycle and maintain a continuity, you cannot escape it. And she's fighting against this individual called the Man in Black. She has to overcome the Man in Black, who threatens her father, among other things. So the story is very reminiscent of like Persephone and Hades and the kidnapping, and she's in an alternate reality because she's a sim who's sentient. And of course, the Man in Black could represent Hades quite easily. But interestingly, this is the same actress who put a documentary out recently about her relationship with Marilyn Manson, another Man in Black. And the relationship between Dolores in Westworld and the Man in Black mirrors the actress's relationship with the Man in Black, Marilyn Manson. And it goes deep into the symbolism of Persephone, but also this character's name is Dolores. In the documentary about how she was abused by Marilyn Manson, she accuses him of abusing her on the movie set of heart-shaped glasses, which is based on a Kubrick movie, Lolita. And this heart-shaped glasses Kubrick thing is about a character named Lolita, whose name is, whose name is Dolores. Dolores Hayes. So she's abused by the Man in Black, Marilyn Manson, as Dolores Hayes. And in Westworld, it's a Man in Black, and her name is Dolores. Those are just a couple examples, but the theme here is repeated. So I kind of get the idea that the situation with Manson is probably fake. And the more I looked into it, it's just replete with 33s, phoenixes, references to Persephone, Alice in Wonderland, which is kind of interesting too. Alice in Wonderland is another one of these, like the Mad Hatter, Hades, Alice, Persephone, Underworld, similar themes. You could also connect this Dolores, I think, to Dorothy and the blue dress, and Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, very much like Persephone and Hades, this otherworld, underworld type situation. But my point being, this movie was completely consistent with the fake news of the day, completely aligned with it. How does that happen? Coincidence? No. Scripting. Our worldview, our internal concept of the world, is being designed for us by the worldview monopoly, represented by the monolithic media presence in our lives. I mean, you couldn't point to one news agency. It's not left or right. It's global, to use that word. All right, let's move on here. Yeah, the Westworld connections are fascinating. I'll probably get into that later. I saw some stuff in the final season that's definitely worth discussing. But there are overt references to 311 built into all of the marketing materials. So it's even in the marketing materials. So again, you could say there are so many coincidences man could not have done this. And I would argue that no, there are so many coincidences that man had to have done this. That no, it couldn't just be coincidence. And calling it a synchronicity is still calling it a coincidence. It's just suggesting it's a meaningful coincidence. And synchronicities are specifically meaningful coincidences that occur um, from a subjective point of view, and would therefore imply some kind of feedback from the quote universe or something. And that's a very tall claim to make when you pile on many of them. So the sheer volume of these things is a point in favor of my take on it, in fact. G33 says, yes, syringe, the pan thing. Yeah, well, look, pandemic or panic-demic. We have moral panics. So the panic-demic really agitates the left because they believe in the new concept of sin and they need to be saved from it with the syringe. So they have this fear of this new concept of sin definable by science, that the new priesthood of scientism are all there to protect us from. And they reject the archaic concept of sin, which the right, the traditional right, still embraces. So the traditional right is against the syringe, but they believe in the archaic concept of sin. So you have two different concepts of salvation: old sin, new sin. Left wing responds to panic-demics, right wing responds to moral panic-demics. So that's why the right's always outraged. It's always the moral outrage of the day. And then you find out that these characters are all just corrupt as can be. It's because that their script is to reiterate the old concepts of sin and challenge the new concept. Trad right versus progressive left. You would say progressive utopianism versus idealized past. And I would also argue that sin and the modern counterpart are equally fake. And these are tools, these are constructs used to regulate people. Lean Dion says dancing nurses twerking to Pan's music. Yeah, they were the nymphs. You got the nymphs and the satyr in the woods. Something else too, the One World Trade Tower was described as a flute. So yeah, syringe, syrinx, pan, it looks like a big syringe. Syrinx is the panpipe, but during its construction, people said that it sounded like the ghosts of 9/11 were shrieking because it's a big pipe, the wind blowing through the One World Trade Tower. So it was a scary panpipe. And when Pan would go romping in the woods, people would go into hiding. It would be a panic. That was the idea. So what happened during the panic-demic, of course? People go into quarantine. Elephant Tusk says, mind parasites represent the third opposition, the undead. The Ghostbusters is all about the undead. You know, I saw the Ghostbusters poster. I might watch it. And it says, I started to watch the second one, or the third one. Unwatchable, but I'll try. Because it's called Frozen Empire. And then you have the Godzilla King Kong movie that just came out that also has a reference to Empire. So I'm wondering what this could mean. I get the feeling that Frozen Empire could be nuclear winter, like Game of Thrones, winter is coming, The Division. That's what would follow. I'm going to have to start watching Fallout tonight on Amazon in order to catch up on what's going to happen. All right, let's continue on here, going through my Twitter likes. The deep state lured everyone into watching the eclipse so they could spray people with chemtrails. So now they've been vaxxed, chemtrailed, 5G'd, been given food and water that's poisoned. According to Red Pill Drifter. Here we go. They released biological payloads on unsuspecting eclipse onlookers. Now this is a truther. This guy's in Trutherville. And I've been saying for some time that truthers live in a nightmare version of reality, a false awakening. He thinks he's awake compared to normies because he believes that everybody's going to die now. That's what it always comes down to. Oh, we're all going to die. All right, let's see if there's anything else I've missed here. I have been doing my work here on going through all these various operatives spamming Twitter with predictions about JFK and Trump and all that, and it's all coming from the same place. This is some kind of Q bot farm somewhere. So there is something out there, some kind of group of people out there who are committed to promulgating this stuff. And now they've dropped the JFK thing and they're just full blown recycling Q drops. And there's a Q drop from 4 years ago that said the Pope would die on 4/11. So many are saying that time traveler Q was predicting that the Pope's going to die on 4/11/2024. I don't care. If it happens, I probably won't care. But the QAnoners care because that would give them some tremendous confirmation bias that JFK Jr. is on the way to save them and all that. Okay, let's see here. Elephant Tusk says the entire theme of 2112 is about dystopia. Rush has a lot of insight into the world stage in their lyrics. Yes, and when it comes to these artists, I think it's likely that many of them may not understand the full import of the more subtle, nuanced bits of predictive programming in their work. But as long as they're just echoing MSM or MSM plus or woke, as long as they're just echoing the stuff, it doesn't even necessarily matter if they're aware of it, because it's all reinforcing the dominant paradigm, the dominant zeitgeist. Okay, we'll be continuing this conversation tomorrow, and well, I'm thinking earlier if I can. Let me go through your comments one more time. The IPS Insider will see print. So a lot of these articles and these PDFs that I'm sending those of you who are subscribed, those are going to see print. I think these are all important ideas, and I think that maybe there should be a time here soon we should set something up, a conversation between myself, maybe even a panel. Let's talk about this scripting versus sync. Scripting versus sync. What's the better explanation? And it's a valuable conversation because what if I'm wrong? What if I'm entirely wrong about this? And it's all some kind of collective manifestation through the television. And this technology is being used right in front of our faces, literally. And until we step out of it, we will remain enthralled to some kind of mass magical ritual that keeps us locked into some twisted version of what reality could be. I mean, maybe that's the case. But like with everything else, I would want to have some information before I get on board with it. And if you really believe that's the case, then you should be very much invested in getting the evidence to support it. This is why I think it's great to challenge people of faith and to challenge believers. I think it's a good idea to do so because it benefits both. It benefits those who are wrong and those who are right. But that's why we are, basically here always open to challenging things and being challenged. I put a link in the chat if you want to join the parallel community on X. And I think there's about 40 people in there so far. And what that is a place on X where we can start to gather around all those with the off-world stage perspective, which is the correct perspective. Whether we're right or wrong about these individual issues, the off-world stage perspective is the only correct one as far as if you want to have any claim to being a seeker, even a truther. The word truther is such a misnomer. The only people who even have a perspective on it, ironically, are the liars at the top who are perpetrating the big deceptions, and those of us who aren't operating within their box. This is The Edge is in Your Mind, Chief Crow. I'll see you all later on in Gilded, and we'll continue our research. Thanks for joining.